Well, here we are at the end of June, and here we are once again with another episode of Perligo Ponders, in which I respond to your questions, comments, and theories about my own questions, comments, and theories. We have this from Sam Kinsel9265. Something I've always wondered about the Saturday video. We see bishop-like figures on the submarine. We all just dismissed them as bishops, but in the outside music video, we see the bishops killing Kions in response to him betraying the bishops by saving Tyler. But all the bishops were in Dima. So, who was on the sub and did they die? This is a very good point, and I confess I myself have largely overlooked this aspect of those two videos from Skill and Icy, Saturday and the Outside. It certainly is true that the Outside picks up right where Saturday left off. So there wouldn't have been time for the bishops on the submarine to make their way back into Dima, even if they survived the shipwreck. Which, the implication there is that Clancy is the only one who survived. I think someone in one of my comments or online somewhere else mentioned, and I believe this is true, that he wrote he was surprised he survived. He shouldn't have survived. And he alone did, at least as far as we can tell. But even if the bishops did survive that shipwreck, they wouldn't have had time to make it back into Dima before the events of what we see at the beginning of the Outside. So yeah, who are those people on the submarine? We all did think they were bishops, but they also look slightly different to how bishops normally look when we've seen them before. And I remember the time Saturday came out, I assumed that they just kind of restylized the bishops' outfits for this new era. But then obviously as we went back into the Clancy era, we saw that they were still stylized the same. And even in the Outside music video at the beginning of that, we see that they have the same costuming as they did during Trench. So my best guess is that the figures we see on the submarine who are dressed like bishops, dressed in red, are just seized vessels that the bishops have there to control and keep an eye on everything, but aren't bishops themselves in the submarine doing any of that. Again, during the Scaled and Icy live stream performance, of which Saturday was supposed to be an extension, right? In the journal, Clancy outlines that they did this performance, and then, because the performance went really well, they went off and did something on the submarine also. In the Scaled and Icy live stream, we see these two figures who are the hosts of Good Day Dima, who are keeping an eye on everything that's going on during that performance. They themselves are not bishops, they're just being seized by bishops, and that's why we see them decaying as the video, or the live stream, went on, as that performance continued. So I think it's most likely that that's what's going on here, that the figures on the submarine and Saturday were not bishops themselves, but just seized vessels dressed up to look like bishops and keep an eye on everyone. In response to, I think, the video I did discussing Clancy's final letter to the Torchbearer, which he says he's going to be a symbol of absolute power, Ion K7U writes, "I like this take, but I think it provokes an even bigger idea. If Clancy is like Frodo, then is seizing / the antlers like the Ring of Power? And if so, this could imply that Clancy must destroy the power of seizing in order to win and save Trench. Maybe Breach will be about him being overthrown or overthrowing the cycle, and the ultimate bad guy is the power of seizing." Again, the story of Clancy and the story of Dima is not directly pulled from Lord of the Rings. It's not a fan fiction of Lord of the Rings or anything like that. There are some influences, and there are some parallels which can be drawn to further illustrate what is happening in this story by looking at what has happened in something that is similar in some ways. But yes, I would agree that the parallel I was trying to draw is that the power of seizing is like the power of the ring. It is this great power that you have to resurrect and control the dead. But it is also fundamentally an evil power. And that's outlined pretty clearly throughout the story and pretty explicitly in the I Am Clancy video. The whole system and religion of Vialism is centered around creating these vessels, the glorious gone, for the antlers and the seizing to make use of. So if there is no power of seizing, then there is no point to make vessels. And so that kind of sits at the core of everything, and if that's taken away or destroyed, Vialism would seem to crumble. Now, there are other fundamental teachings behind Vialism, but I think, such as that the path of self-destruction is the only way to true happiness and things like that. But I think those are just outlined and taught to the citizens in order to convince them to follow this path. As Clancy says in a sarcastic tone in the I Am Clancy video, it also conveniently allows you to become a vessel for them to use. That really is the true purpose behind Vialism, is creating these vessels for the bishops to use and control. And so the whole idea behind it is this lust for power, which is again what you see in Lord of the Rings. It's the one ring of power, right? Power is the main thing that everyone wants, power and control. This may not be how the story plays out or how it all goes down explicitly in the way they choose to end the story on Breach. But I do think that fundamentally what needs to be destroyed is this system of turning people into mindless corpses that you can control through the power of seizing. And so the power of seizing does need to be done away with. And I think where I first noticed this in the outside, when Clancy was given the power of seizing and began using it, that was the first moment where I thought, okay, maybe there's going to be some brokenness in his character where he's going to start going down a troubled path here, even as he tries to do the right thing. And then, we've seen that more and more with the letters to the Torchbearer and from the Torchbearer implying all of this, and then the broken contract and things like that. Again, I'm not necessarily sure that we have perfect evidence that he's going to become a bishop. However, I do think that using this power does have a corrupting factor to it, just like using the One Ring of Power, or even possessing that. As we saw in Lord of the Rings, Frodo didn't really use the ring. He used it a bit in Fellowship, and he used it from time to time when he needed to hide, but he never used it for the purpose of power, of what it was supposed to have been made for. He just used the byproduct of it, the side effect of it, which was that he could turn invisible. But then right at the end, after having carried it for so long, it overcame him. Its power overcame him, and he became controlled by the instrument of control. And so I worry that something similar would happen to Tyler if we can see that parallel there. But again, this isn't Lord of the Rings, and so it very easily could go down a different path. And it could be that there's no reason why Clancy would be overcome by the power of seizing. But I do think that the second he used it, that he used the weapons, the evil weapons of the enemy against them, that he started to go down a troubled path to some extent. It's going to corrupt him in some level, at some level. X Factor 22 writes, I don't know if this has ever been said because I've listened to Top for a long time now and realized there was lore. But in the self-titled album, the song The Pantaloon, a line from the song says, and all your friends fertilize the ground you walk, lose your mind. I'm thinking that he used to have friends or someone he was close to in the city of Dima, and they committed to Vialism and now have a neon gravestone to decay in, or are vessels to be used. So he has gone crazy and lost his mind, and he is now in the rebellion against the 9 bishops and the city of Dima, with the task to also save more people from committing to Vialism fully. Sorry for such a long theory, but that wasn't too long. I agree with about half of this. I don't know that I quite see that connection of him losing his mind being the thing, the catalyst that spurred him on to rebellion. I think in the process of rebellion, as I was just talking about, you can make the argument that he might or is losing his mind in some way, but I don't think the very fact that he chooses to join the rebellion and then eventually ends up leading the rebellion against the 9 bishops of Dima is a sign that he has lost his mind and gone crazy. I do think it's probably fair to say that he has had friends in Dima in the past who he lost to Vialism. If nothing else, he has companions that he arrived at the city of Dima with, because we see that in one of his letters. The bishops have destroyed the hope which many of us arrived with, implying that he arrived either with or in similar fashion to other people, something which would bond him with those. And then obviously, as we know, in the structure of the city, it's like this top-down thing that leads ultimately to these small villages where people know each other within that and talk to each other within that, and likely form friendships within that. So yeah, I don't think it's at all a stretch to say that he has lost friends to Vialism over the course of this. We haven't seen that necessarily explicitly spelled out, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen, and I don't think it's unfair to say that that would be a part of the story. It makes perfect sense. Jack Blonda3149 writes, Perligo ponders, there's a reason that every show ends with the song Trees. Do we think that there is a way that Trees is connected somehow to the lore and the ending? Now, this is a theory that I expanded upon and outlined a lot more about a year ago when we were getting ready for Clancy to come out and then just after Clancy had come out. We see the symbolism of trees throughout the story, but often it's just hinted at. And as he mentioned here, it's part of the show. There's a song called Trees. We also see it in Ride. We see trees in a forest at the beginning of Overcompensate. We see trees in the background in Routines of the Night, which, it's not part of the explicit narrative of the lore, but it definitely takes place somewhere in the lore in some regard. Certainly compared to a lot of the other music videos on Clancy, that one is very lore heavy. We also see trees referenced to. There's a tree house referenced and stressed out, obviously, in the forest, the song Forest. On the album art for the self-titled album, we see a tree house there. And then, we have songs like Forest or Trees that are quite prominent. And yeah, every concert, every show has ended with the song Trees since, I think, Vessel. Maybe even slightly before Vessel, but definitely since Vessel came out. And I have talked about this a bit in the past, but just to reiterate, I do very much think the story will end in a forest somehow. Or at least I very much hope that it will, because it would make perfect sense to do that. As I mentioned when Clancy came out, throughout the lore, we've had all these references to cars and driving and all of that. We have Taxi Cab, A Car, Torch, and Death. We've seen the car in Heavy Dirty Soul. It was a pretty prominent image in Heavy Dirty Soul, Jumpsuit, and the Trench era as a whole. And then finally, next semester, we get an explanation for why, what the point of that car is, what it means to Tyler, and what it means for the story. And in similar fashion, we have seen all these references to trees, so I hope that we have something which also explains why that is, what's going on there. Even if it's not fully, it would certainly be a spectacular ending to the story if it took place in a forest somehow. And I don't think that's impossible either. I mean, if we imagine what we see in Paladin Strait with Clancy or Tyler sitting on the rocks playing the ukulele, separated from the rest of what's going on in that video, if that's supposed to take place after the events of Paladin Strait in some sense, right? If there's are two timelines converging, as I was talking about earlier, he could then go from there into a forest somewhere. And that's where the story would end. And there's a lot of really cool things they could do with that. Doesn't mean they necessarily will, but I think if this story ends without any kind of further explanation for what's going on with trees, I will be very surprised. This next comment is from Jack also, and he writes, in the new blurry face tweet, it shows a video and there's a faint clicking noise in the background, like a projector. In the video, blurry face says, check the doors, check the windows, then pull the blinds. This comment came out before the contract came out, when everyone kind of assumed that was Blurryface saying that because it was in his voice. Still could be Blurryface saying that. There's other theories about that, but regardless, that's why this comment reads the way it does. Almost like what someone would do before they start the slideshow from a projector. There is a projector used by Clancy in the Overcompensate video, good point, and a slideshow being shown in the I Am Clancy video. On top of that, in the I Am Clancy video, there's a shadow on the ground at the beginning that looks like a ceiling fan, obviously huge reference to Glowing Eyes and the self-titled album, but it can also maybe be seen as the slides in the circular projector. Yeah, I think that very much could be the case, especially for the I'm Clancy video. That even could be something that was supposed to take place during the Overcompensate video. We see him with the projector talking to the citizens of Dima and outlining the plan of attack. But as part of that, he could also be outlining who he is, explaining who he is to everyone. Because some people would know, but other people might be confused, especially since the bishops had just proclaimed that he was dead. And then he's come back from the dead, right? And so the I'm Clancy video could be something that was told through a projector to the citizens of Dima as part of all of that. I think that makes a lot of sense. The lyrics from the contract, yes, that could be tied into a projector as well somehow, but we are also not, we're still kind of unsure what the context is for those. Clancy seems to be the one singing them, obviously, in the contract. The Necromancer now seems to pretty definitively be Blurryface, but, what's the context in which he's checking the doors and pulling the blinds and all of that? Still a little unsure, because we don't see that explicitly in the contract music video. Stasio at Night writes, Perligo Ponders. A comment featured in the video, this was from the last Perligo Ponders episode, states that Banditos are the good side, but while Clancy wants to take over the city and turn it to something good, they want to destroy it. If the Banditos are the rebels and Dima won't exist, what happens to them then? Where do they go? What do they do? I'm on Clancy's side, turning the city to something good. I'm beginning to see the Banditos as the bad-ish, not as bad as the bishops ones. This is an interesting idea. I don't know necessarily that the idea behind wanting to destroy Dima came from the Banditos themselves. I think that's something that did come from Clancy originally. That was the plan which he outlined to all of them. As we see in Bandito, I created this world, destroy it if I want. And then in the digital remains, we see all these images of Dima burning, and he's there, and so it seems like he destroyed Dima. But correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know that we necessarily explicitly saw him outline a plan to destroy Dima. He mentions that in Bandito, but that's also talking about the world as a whole. We've always assumed that the plan is to destroy Dima, especially since Clancy came out and we saw those images. And I may be completely blanking on something here, so feel free to correct me. But the more I'm thinking about it right now, I don't think that was actually explicitly outlined. I think that was just hinted at or implied to some degree, and we ran with that. But that might not have ever been the original plan. As to having some dynamic between the Banditos and Clancy, I'm not necessarily opposed to turning the city to good rather than destroying it either. I think Clancy mirroring the words or the motives of the bishops by saying he wants to be a symbol of absolute power is concerning. But I think I've been careful since that letter first came out to simply say it was concerning and not necessarily bad. Because if Dima's not going to be destroyed, there needs to be some kind of leadership there. Now, would that be some kind of democracy rather than rule by this weird cult? There's different ways to do it. But I do think Clancy taking control or ruling, since he is already kind of the champion and the leader of the Banditos, if they come in, overthrow the bishops, and then they take over Dima themselves, well, he's already their leader, so it's not impossible that he could become a good leader. It's just concerning the way he is talking about it and seeming to go about it, if that is going to be what he does. But all that is to say, I don't disagree that it might be better to keep the city and turn it into something good than just completely destroy it. And again, I don't know that we necessarily know the end game here is to destroy it. I think we've just been assuming that. But I could just be blanking on that. Perhaps there's other evidence that I'm now completely forgetting about that, because it is something we have so strongly been assuming is going to be the case, that he is just going to destroy it, or they are. That is the plan. So let me know where they outlined that they wanted to destroy the city of Dima. Catarol writes, I noticed during some live shows, mainly the Line at the Game Awards, Josh's drum set had the Breach logo on his drums. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm a little confused on the lore of 21pilots, but I kind of have a grip on it. Yes, I think his drum did have that logo during that performance, and also throughout many, if not all, of the videos for Clancy. The logo for Breach really is just another color variant of the logo that we had for Clancy, but it's the same shape. And it's certainly not a color scheme that wasn't included as part of Clancy. Now, I've seen some discussion about this before online, like on Reddit and stuff, and also in my comments. They haven't changed or actually updated the logo, which is another reason why Breach feels like the second half to this album. There's also what he was talking about during the Zane Lowe interview that he and Josh did. Clancy was supposed to have more songs, and then they just had too many, and they didn't want to create a deluxe or expanded edition of Clancy, so they are doing a new full-length album. But it is very much a direct continuation of Clancy, even more so than any album before has been a continuation of what came before. So we are still really in the Clancy era. So yeah, as I was talking about earlier, technically speaking, it's not a double album, but it is very much the second half of Clancy. And as a representation of that, the logo is exactly the same, and it's just bringing in one of the other color variants that we saw and making that the primary logo on their profiles and things like that. But that logo was not in any way absent from what we were seeing before. Elijah Pennington W5P writes, Perligo comment. I still believe that the story will wrap around into Blurryface, given how Paladin Strait ended with So Few, So Proud, So Emotional, Hello Clancy, and leading into Fairly Local. It might, and I do agree that we are seeing a lot of symbolism, which returns us to Fairly Local, which began the Blurryface era. So I do think it's fair to point out that connection. I still don't subscribe to the idea that this is going to end with the cycle restarting. The whole story is about cycles restarting and repeating over and over again, and so there isn't much end to a story if it just does that once more. I think what could be fair to say is that Paladin Strait ended with the cycle starting once again in Blurryface, but Breach is going to break that cycle. It's going to breach that cycle. And so the story was getting ready to repeat. The cycle was getting ready to restart. But instead, we have the contract coming in the middle of that, allowing Clancy to reopen his eyes and breaching the cycle, breaking the cycle in half. So I don't think the story is going to end by restarting the cycle. I think the story is going to end on a note of finality for a number of reasons, one of which just practically being that the band, Tyler and Josh themselves, want to end the story so they can move past it and start doing something new with their music, which is totally fair. I think the story, I don't know if it's fair to say the story has run its course, because that implies that it's kind of become stale, and that isn't the case at all. But I do think it is getting to a point where it's a good time to wrap it up without overindulging in the story or having it stretch on throughout the rest of their music career. I think it's good to wrap it up now, wrap it up well, and finalize it and finish it. And I don't think as part of that they're going to leave it open-ended in the sense that it's just a cycle repeating, because then we could be like, well, everything after this could still be tying into that story somehow, because it didn't actually ever end. I don't think that's really what they want to do. But to shorten that answer, I don't think you're wrong. I just think that the whole point of Breach is that you're right, and Breach is coming in the middle of that and stopping that from happening. I don't think Breach is going to wrap around into Blurryface, but I think Clancy was starting to do that. With that being said, thank you so much for watching. I know this was a bit of a longer one, but it was longer because so many of you had so many great ideas and theories that I wanted to discuss and explore further. There were some more that I wasn't able to include in this video just due to length and not having quite enough to say right now, but some of them I will be returning to either in a longer video later on dedicated solely to that idea itself, or I will be back in the comments responding to you there. So, especially if you flagged a comment as for Perligo Ponders and I didn't have a chance to include it in this video, look out for a response to that at some point in the future in some format. If you would like your comment to be featured in the next video or one of the other videos moving forward, all you have to do is comment something interesting, an interesting theory, idea, question, or something generally intriguing. Feel free to flag it as Perligo Ponders if you want, but you don't have to do that. I don't exclusively pull from those comments. And as always, don't forget to subscribe for more music commentary and reviews.